You're at your old trusty boat. You call mighty sparrow. I'm in the city of Mardi Gras.
Welcome to the Sailing into Oblivion podcast, where we sit down with everyday people who do extraordinary things. I'm your host, Jerome Rand. Welcome to the Sailing into Oblivion podcast. Before we get into today's show, you have to forgive me and forego any comments or promises to get into the story of Stephen Callahan, because I came into this just thinking I'd whip through some of these questions that I got, and ended up taking basically an hour. So in order to sort of try and keep in that framework, I'm going to do that Sailing Stories edition. I'll add that onto a podcast further on down the line. So other than that, if you want to support the podcast, as I always say, head over to Patreon, Sailing into Oblivion. Link will be in the description. Other than that, today we're going to talk about heavy weather sailing, some storm tactics, and basically some seamanship stuff. It was all brought together by a email I received the other day, and I wanted to get to them because they seemed like pretty relevant questions. That's about it. Without further ado, let's go ahead and... I have actually thrown the Crowhurst video onto YouTube, so going to give that a shot. Got to sort of keep things fresh and try some new stuff and see if I can draw in a few more listeners. So call me crazy, but I figured I'd give it a shot anyway. So we're going to try and have the Sailing Stories sections of some of these upcoming podcasts put out live on YouTube, and then you can see my face in my famous pith helmet hat. It'll be great and fantastic. So if you want to come out and get in touch with the show, just head over to sailingintooblivion.com and you can email me directly, and I read them all. Thanks for everybody that's sending in all the positive feedback and stuff. I really appreciate it. Here we go with the show. Good morning. Good morning. It is just a shade after 4 a.m. up here in Rockland, Maine. The half light is upon us, which I always love to have out at sea. I went to bed at about 8 o'clock last night after a scorcher of a day in the 80s in the sun without much wind and the dust of the boatyard. Whew. So, old man living up here right now, but feeling good, feeling strong, and ready to hit up another 2 days of hard laborious work to get into the weekend, kick back, relax, have a little fun, and hopefully maybe even take the mast out of Mighty Sparrow so that I can get to work on prepping that sucker and making her seaworthy once again. So we will see. But today, I'm going to actually break this into two parts because I received a lot of feedback and emails about the last episode that I did featuring the story of Donald Crowhurst. So I actually am going to dive in and do one more of those, but I'm trying to sort of expand a little bit. So I'm going to, hopefully, it's tricky because I have all this old equipment and stuff, but I think I found a way to be able to not only have this on the podcast, but record the next story via video as well and be able to put that on YouTube. It's just going to be me talking. I still don't know how to edit pictures and music or anything like that in there, and maybe that'll come at some point, but for now we're just going to work with what we got. So I'm going to talk about, we're going to answer a few questions from a listener named Tim. I want to get to all those because he's got some great questions that I think are pretty thought-provoking, and I just figure if you guys want my opinion on it, I will give it to you. No problem. So I got my coffee. Like I said, it's nice and early. It's quiet, which is perfect. And we'll get into that. And then the second half, we'll dive into another solo sailing story from from the depths of the 80s, and that would be the story of Stephen Callahan, who spent 76 days in a life raft, which sounds like essentially my biggest nightmare, and we'll get into why, but when I read that book that he wrote adrift, it just sends chills down the old spine. It really is one of the scariest things I can imagine. In a lot of ways, I almost think it would be preferable just to bite the dust right then and there. But the will to survive is definitely ingrained into our psyche, our lizard brain, whatever you want to call it. But man, it's the stuff that he went through mentally day to day in that life raft is absolutely terrifying to me, and I hope that it's something I never have to experience, because holy cow. But we'll get into that sort of stuff. But from this email that I got from Tim, I just wanted to hit it up because he's got like four pretty interesting, I think, questions. And the first one is just thoughts on the right boat to do serious sailing, i.e., Southern Ocean, high latitudes, all that sort of stuff, and solo as well. And I do not claim by any stretch of the imagination to be an expert on all types of boats. I know of a few other boats. There's a great list of them in John Kretschmer's book, Sailing a Serious Ocean. So that's a big reference point, because he is an absolute master when it comes to heavy weather sailing. And he's done, I don't know if he does any single-handed stuff, but he's definitely done double-handed, round Cape Horn from east to west. John Kretschmer really is probably one of the greatest American captains as far as sailing and heavy weather sailing, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm hoping one day to be in Florida when he's in Florida and see if I could tag him in for a quick interview, because that would be absolutely amazing. I've read pretty much all of his books, and I would fully recommend anybody looking for heavy weather instruction and advice and incredible examples of being in said weather. And also, like the question asks, what type of boats are really, really good for blue water, high latitude sailing? His book, Sailing a Serious Ocean, is phenomenal. And one of the things that I think leads to some of the my belief in it is that he has 10 old but proven classics that can still cross oceans. And one of the first sailboats he mentions and describes in that would be the West Sail 32. And so he's at least got one of them right. Nah, he's got a lot of them. I'll just throw this list out real quick. Camper Nichols 35, Tiana 37, Shannon 38, Valiant 40, Bristol 40, Mason 43, Peterson 44, Stevens 47, Gulf Star 50, and I'm sure he's got, he didn't put the, I would have thought for sure I would have seen the one that he took was a, what was it? Hold on one sec. The Contessa 32. I think it seems to be, and I know it's because he sailed them before. He really, really loves the Contessa as far as its sailing ability. And I've been aboard one of those. I've never sailed one, but from what I understand, they're very sea kindly. So instead of like on Mighty Sparrow, you have that big rounded bow, which is great if you're surfing down super steep waves. It hits the water and it's almost like it's allergic and pops right back up. So the idea of pitch poling or driving into the trough of a wave and sort of stalling isn't really there. It just sort of kind of stays above that water. But Yeah, he loves those boats, and rightfully so. They're well built, they're well founded, but this being sea kindly is something, I don't know. I think it has to be taken into account because you don't want to be out there and just have everything be miserable all the time. And I know one of the problems with the West Sail, that old time full keel, rounded sort of shape that Mighty Sparrow has, lends to two big issues. One, when you've got a lot of swell and not a lot of wind, the rolling motion prevents the sails from gripping the wind and being able to hold on, so you get the whole collapsing of the sail as the mast leans, and then it leans back the other way, and then wha-bam, the sails fill up, and there's a lot of shock load, so that's not good. Sails get worn and torn. So a lot of times you end up having to just take everything down and float there, and then you're really pitching and rolling. The other issue is if you're headed into the wind, she doesn't like to cut through waves. She likes to hobby horse over them, which drops your speed down into the 2 knot range, and it's very uncomfortable, and you're just not making very good headway even when there's wind. It's just because those waves, that chop coming right into it. So I've always just ended up peeling away a little bit, heading about 60 to 70 degrees off the wind so that I'm riding and going up and down the waves without bashing into them. So not very advantageous if you're trying to head directly upwind. So there's, with all these boats, there are pros and cons to every single one. There's a great saying out there that there is no perfect boat, and I definitely believe that. But I think for that question, the right boat for serious, solo sailing, blue water sailing, you're looking for something that's built well. It's built stout. It's in that 30 to 40 foot range, because anything bigger than that gets a little tricky to deal with on your own. And when you get smaller than that, I'm sure there's some really small boat enthusiasts that would disagree with me, but I think it's kind of nice to have a little bit of length under your keel, and just for when the waves get really big, you still kind of feel like you got something substantial you're sitting on, plus you're able to have a bunch of gear and a bunch of food and all the stuff you sort of need. You can fit it on the boat, and you can live on the boat comfortably, and that's something I don't think a lot of people take into account, is trying to be on a boat that you find to be kind of comfortable and homey. When you're out there alone for a long time, and especially when the outside environment is either cold or it's windy and it's wet and it's like that for extended periods of time, it's really nice to be able to go down below and be nice and dry and warm in a comfortable bunk, or sitting at a nav station, even with a computer with a movie playing, and maybe even some Bluetooth speakers so it's super loud, and you can sort of escape a little bit from where you have the miseries of where you are. So I don't know. I put a lot into that, and a West Sail definitely does a lot of that. Gives you a nice, comfortable little place to hide away even when you're out at sea. I mean, there have been times where I've almost essentially taken the day off, and whether it's the sun and the heat is beating down, or it's just cold and rainy and wet, closing up all the hatches, I'm still out there sailing, and I come down below and just watch a movie or two, and it's rare, but sometimes it's nice. It is kind of funny, though, because when you do finish up and the movie's over, it's sort of like, all right, back to reality. And you head up on deck, and it's still raining, and it's still ugly out, and you're all of a sudden slapped back in the face of reality. So I don't know. But yeah, I tend to, in my opinion, go with the old slow and steady, safe and sound, rather than the super speedy fast boats. I think if you wanted to just do a lap around Antarctica and you had the means to be able to afford a boat that is super fast, i.e. a planing boat or something like that, like an open 40 or something. That would be pretty cool to be able to work the storm systems and go fast enough where instead of on my boat having the systems just roll over you, you can actually put yourself in the right position to ride the front edge of these low pressure systems. So you're getting all the wind but not the waves. You're moving really fast, and as long as things keep going well, you can sort of stay on the edge of them. That would be nice. Plus, you'd be in and out of the Southern Ocean in probably a month or so instead of 4 months. So I don't know. There's a lot to be said for speed out there, that's for sure. And there's a lot of times where it would have been nice to be able to get a couple 100 miles north in a day rather than in multiple days. So that's something definitely to be taken into account. But from my perspective, as somebody who's never had a huge budget for any of this sort of stuff, then I'd be looking for something older, something well-found, well-built. I like boats pre-1980s where they started using balsa cores and foam cores and things like that. The idea of multiple layers of different type of materials all out there taking a beating over and over and over again and then slowly degrading and delaminating is pretty terrifying. I like the idea of solid fiberglass or aluminum or steel, something that can really, really take a pounding. That to me is the most important thing, because in the end, you just want to be able to make it back and make it through. And it's when you're out there and all hell breaks loose and the rig comes down and then you're getting bashed even more. And then all of a sudden the deck starts separating from the hull or something like that. That's exactly what you don't want, or at least I don't want it. And I think in a lot of terms, when you do see pretty ugly weather, like bad weather is one thing, but when it gets really bad, it's that's when you I don't know, it's once you've seen it, it changes your mind about the ocean and being on a sailboat and everything. At least it did for me, where you sort of think, holy cow, it can get like really bad. And I haven't even seen it when it's really, really bad. I couldn't even imagine. Sometimes I think about that when I'm trying to plan some new voyage or even just a trip up and down the East Coast, because stuff can come out of nowhere. But you do have to take into consideration what it'd be like to be in 30 to 40 foot breaking waves, survival conditions, 70 to 80 knot winds. You're wearing ski goggles to even be on deck. You're not able to walk around. It's all crouching, complete just survival conditions. I don't know. It's pretty crazy. So when I do like a cutter rig, that one allows you the big sails. Typically you're going to have a bowsprit, not always. But having a cutter rig, I really like that for the variation of, gigantic big drifters and asymmetrical spinnakers and all that sort of stuff for light winds. And then you can also buckle it right down with a staysail or a storm jib. It's all on deck, tiny mainsail. That's one of the big things I really like, is a mainsail that you can reef way down, way further down than you ever think you need. Because I'll tell you what, 55 knots of wind will produce enough power to push almost any boat under essentially a sail the size of a bed sheet. And it's pretty incredible to see. But when those winds are sustained at that level, man, oh man, it's so strong. You almost just go bare poles at that point. But I digress. So those are sort of the criteria for me. It's really, I want a boat that's built super crazy strong. Doesn't have to be super fast or anything like that. I like a cutter rig, and I like it to be a bit comfortable down below. As we said, the old West sails have a tendency not to be what you would call sea kindly. So if you can find, essentially that's a bit of a different keel shape and more of a narrow bow that can sort of slice through the waves in the chop so that you can keep your speed up, and it's just more comfortable. It's not slamming, it's sort of slicing. And the old West Sails are lean definitely more towards the old slamming and hobby horsing side, but it's something that I put up with because when I am running downwind in pretty ugly seas and I'm surfing it up to 15 to almost 20 knots, watching the spray come off of the bow on either side is quite incredible. And even though it is a little nerve-wracking, there's quite a bit of confidence that I still have in the fact that the boat, it's going to take a very tremendous wave timed just perfectly to pitch pole me or something like that. So I don't know. It's pretty cool. And I do also, one other thing is I do like to always briefly consider sort of worst case scenarios. And obviously the worst case scenario for any sailor is going to be that the boat sinks. But I guess you back up from that one a little bit and we're talking, you lose your rig. So what happens at that point? Now with the West Sail 32, these are deck stepped, and a lot of people kind of cringe at that. They're like, ooh, that's not quite as strong. Well, I think it's still pretty strong because essentially all the parts are there. You have your compression post. It's just not the whole mast continuing down. What I really like about it is if in that event that the mast does come down, it's not going to, hopefully, it's going to do less damage to the actual deck. It's not going to rip a big hole in the deck or anything like that. Hopefully it's just going to fall off to the side. You're going to be able to clear it or pull all the rigging back on and lash it down for later. But you're essentially going to transform from a sailboat to a lifeboat on a West Sail. And then you just rig up something else and get back to land. That's essentially it. Or if you've got plenty of fuel, you just fire up that old engine and you're like a little tugboat. Little West Sail tugboat. Oh man. So I don't know. Those are a few thoughts on that one. But like I said in the beginning, there's no perfect boat. There's going to be pros and cons, and you just have to figure out what type of boat and what pros you want and what cons you can put up with. But yeah, like I said, one of the great books for it, Sailing a Serious Ocean, John Kretschmer. Check it out. And that actually sort of leads into the next question, which is heavy weather tactics. What do you do to prep? For me, I think the biggest takeaway is you want to have more than one plan in mind. You can sit there, and I talked a lot about this in the presentation that I did a couple weeks ago. And, when you're faced with an upcoming big challenge, a storm is in the forecast sort of thing. And, for these guys, it was more of an economic storm, I guess. But for us sailors, it's you download the weather and something really ugly is coming. Gale force, force 10, whatever, something pretty nasty. What do you do? And kind of the initial reaction typically is like go into panic mode. How can I escape? What do I do? And you start freaking out. But that absolutely helps no one. And sitting there and worrying about it doesn't help anything at all. The best thing to do is get productive and start coming up with game plans, checking over equipment, all that sort of stuff. And one of the things that John always says is try and get some sleep, which is probably one of the harder ones, but it's sensible because if you don't, if you're exhausted by the time the storm comes because you've been so worried the whole time, then all of a sudden you're going to be making bad choices. You're going to be slow and sluggish, and it's much better to be refreshed and ready to be awake for 24, 36 hours if you have to. I used to always do that on yacht deliveries. As soon as I was off watch, if nothing else had to be done, boom, I would hit my bunk and sleep. And sometimes they'd be like, man, you just sleep a lot, don't you? Hey, man, you got to be prepared. I want to be as well rested as possible because if things get really ugly. The first delivery trip I ever did was from Newport to Florida in December, and we ran into like a force 9 gale off of just closing in on Hatteras or something. It was awful. When I think back to that, I wish I have like just journal entries. Wasn't really doing much in the logbook. I was like a last minute addition. It was my first delivery, and man, we just got walloped. And I kind of wanna. I wish I could remember or was more involved with, everything from the weather watching to our planning and stuff. Because now when I think back to it, I'm pretty sure it was just a low pressure system that came off of Hatteras, and we were pretty much close to Hatteras or getting close because we ended up pulling in after this thing just for a night until the seas cleared up. But man, I mean, we were on a big boat. It was actually kind of a well-known boat in the Newport area. It was called, not Kodiak. Yeah, I think it was Kodiak. Yeah, Kodiak. It was a Frere's, like 66 or something like that. Any event, really, really nice, big, strong racing boat. And I think it had won the Newport to Bermuda race or something. Who knows? In any event, being well rested, that's a huge thing. You want to make sure that you're good to go, but it's easier said than done, because if all you're thinking about is the coming storm, it's pretty hard to put your head down. But even if you're just lying there, eyes closed and all that sort of stuff, it's still at least resting your body. So that's number one. But like I said, coming up with multiple game plans. So for example, on Sparrow, essentially bad weather forecast comes in, checking the equipment over, making sure every pin is right in place and there's no chafe while all that stuff's going on. I would typically have multiple stages of different tactics that I could use. And the thing with these weather systems and stuff like that you run into out at sea is no two are ever the same. Sometimes it's super heavy winds with large rolling swell that barely ever breaks, and then other times, so then it's more about just handling the wind that you're feeling at the top of these sort of mountainous seas. Other times it's steep, crazy breaking waves that you really need to try and run away from, and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes there's a lee shore and you don't have a huge amount of sea room. And so there's always little differences, and that's why I think it's so important to always have multiple sort of things that you could do. For instance, on Sparrow, if I have all the sea room in the world and things start getting really ugly, I will typically try, if I can, if it's advantageous, I'm going to run with the storm. I like moving with it, especially if it's the direction you're trying to go, because you're going to make some really good time and a lot of miles. But it's also pretty easy in Sparrow, I've found, to run with just that mainsail up and just reefed way down. Sometimes I'll have a storm jib sheeted hard into the middle, just to help keep the bow down, prevent us a little bit from rounding up into the wind or anything like that. But she tracks with that long keel. She tracks really, really well with just the mainsail. Tiny mainsail. I mean, we're talking really tiny. But if the winds keep piping up more and more and I'm surfing, it's getting a little nerve-wracking, a little out of control, then I can just drop that mainsail pretty easily. It's not like I'm hanging over the side of the boat. I just drop it down, lash it down, and then I still have that storm jib up. And essentially then it's the pressure of the wind on the mast. I lash the Dodger down. Anything, whenever you get in those situations where waves are high enough where they can sort of crash right over the boat, it's really important to have anything and everything that's sort of canvas or has big areas to be lashed down, because those waves, I mean, I've had my Dodger ripped right off. It happens. So you gotta, you feel way more exposed when you don't have it, but at the same time, if the wave takes it out, you won't ever have it again. So it's worth sort of being a little proactive there. Now, I've never had to try it out, but I don't even have a drogue or anything like that on the boat because I have so many. The West Sail has the boomkin, which has whisker stays, and then I've got Mongo, the wind vane, and then up on the bow you've got the bob stay and the other whisker stays, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot hanging over this boat. I've always felt like it's a recipe for disaster. And it's only in my opinion, but to have, these drogues trailing behind and all that sort of stuff and extra lines and setting them and all that, I've always really enjoyed and found it good to be able to slow or stop the boat going hove to or fore reaching, anything like that, using just the boat and getting really good with that, because I'm pretty sure just about every boat can stall out as long as you try and practice it. You can get pretty good at it, and I've found that Sparrow can withstand quite a bit. Just hove to and still moving forward just a little bit, but not by any means fast. But I don't know. I like that. I like that availability to just be able to make a split-second decision and say, okay, no, it's time to go hove to, or something has gone wrong on the boat. I can't surf at 15 knots anymore. I got to attend to this and go ahead and fix that. And so let's go hove to. So I like having those sort of options. But yeah, I mean, as I do have on here about a 200-foot warp, and this essentially just comes from listening to Robin Knox Johnson, who had a very similar boat and his experiences. And when he wanted to slow things way, way down, out of control, high latitudes, really ugly stuff, he would just trail this. I think his was like 700 feet or something. I don't even know, but my thinking is, tie off one of the anchors or something heavy to the end, and then just stream the warp all the way out the stern and let it just sort of grip onto the sea. Nothing to the tune of a drogue or anything like that. We're talking minimal sort of friction there, but enough to sort of slow things down. And then, with a line like that, you could add to it, I suppose. But like I said, I don't like trailing stuff because I've heard too many stories of people getting them wrapped around their wind vanes and then ripping them off and breaking them. And that wind vane to me is one of the most valuable pieces of equipment on this boat, because without it, then you're trying to go slocum route and just lash the tiller off and just go for it and let the boat do its thing, which I've actually never even played with on this boat, but I suppose that would be something I might have to try on the next sail. But yeah, so I don't know. I've done fore reaching, and essentially that's just trying to be on sort of a close reach. It's almost like being hove to, but you're still moving forward at a bit of a pace, and that one's pretty good if you got a lee shore or you really don't want to lose any sea ground, or you want to still make some way. I've done it quite a few times, and essentially it's going, instead of going a half a knot to 1 knot when I'm hove to, now I'm going 2 knots to maybe 3 knots, still going up into the wind about 60 degrees off the wind and waves, and taking the seas in the most comfortable and safest way that you can, while still kind of going and fighting into the storm. And usually that is actually advantageous to you getting out of that storm. Not always, but if you're in the Southern Ocean and the storms are moving from west to east, yeah, if you start fore reaching into it, you'd be heading back towards the west, and so you're basically going the opposite direction of the storm, so you're going to get through it a little faster. When you're running with it, especially at speed, then you're actually going to be in that system for longer. But like I said, it's sometimes nice because you're getting all those miles out. But yeah, so I don't know. It's knowing your boat. It's having multiple game plans ready to go that you've tested, tried and true. You know you can try them because you're always going to have to be reacting to the current situation and what is going on. I've never tried lying a hull. I don't know. I feel like that is just a ticking time bomb, but I know there's people that swear by it. So, I can only speak from my own experience, but lying a hull is where you lash the tiller, you take all the sails down, and you just weather that storm and hope that your boat is strong enough and will just sit, basically beam to. But I don't know. I'm not gonna downgrade any of the stuff that I haven't actually tried, so I'm not really even gonna speak on that one. That one can be researched. The only thing I do know is that when you're not being proactive and actually trying to do something and actually move, it changes the game a little bit because you're just sitting there and you're just weathering. But if you're actually running with it or forereaching or even to some extent hove to, because you're still moving a little bit, then at least you feel like you're gaining something, you're doing something. The idea of not doing anything and just waiting, I don't know. I don't like it. I've never tried it though, so I'm not gonna be that kid who's like, no, I don't like that food, and I've never actually eaten it. Oh man, my brothers used to do that. Oh, gotta love it. And then. That kind of leads us into, he talks about mentally prepping. And again, I think for coming bad weather, mentally, the biggest thing is, not to freak out and panic. You just want to have your stuff ready, essentially, if you go over and check all the equipment mentally, that's going to kind of ease your brain a little bit because okay, everything is where it should be. It's all looking good. All right, so I got that going for me. Check. Your brain can take a little break on that. Then, you get your storm jibs and you get your warp and you get all the things that you may need out ready to go. Boom, you're already ready to go on that. Check. Brain can calm down a little bit more. And then you've got plan A, B, C, and D. So I know I'm going to go for triple reef main, and then I've got the storm jib, and then I've got the warp that I can run out, and then I can do this, and this is how I'll do it, and everything is set. Check. Okay, so I'm ready to go. Is there anything else I really can do? Nah, not really. Maybe just check the weather every once in a while. I'm going to go read a book to try and take a quick nap because I have 12 hours before any of this is going to happen. Check. So that's, mentally, you do have to do some hurdles because your brain is instantly going to try to get you right back to the scare. You're going to see a cloud or something and be like, oh, man. But it's, I don't know. It's just one of those things. When you're out there, I've always found that was where out in the ocean by myself was where I learned how to control my brain a little bit more, sort of take the helm as it were, because you're alone for so long and because you're sort of dealing with a lot of stuff, compared to being on land where I don't know, sometimes I find it's more difficult just because your brain is being fed so much more information and stuff from people and screens and all that. But that's a conversation for another podcast. And then that sort of leads into how I mentally deal with long solo passages, things breaking, fear. How do you push on when things get tough? So this really, I think because when you go sailing, you have a goal in mind. So you're sailing, whether it's from Maine to the Caribbean or Gloucester to Cape Horn or anywhere. You have the timeline and you have the set destination, you have the goal. It's not as though you're just like, well, I'm going to go out to sea for as long as I can, and then whenever I feel like it, I'm going to come back. That's pretty rare. I don't know of anybody that really goes out and does that sort of stuff, just to be out there. But it's so when you're leaving, you're like, okay, the destination is here. This is how long it's going to take to get there, whether it be 2 weeks or 5 months. You've sort of have this timeline that's already there, and that I think helps wholeheartedly when you're having tough times, the weather's bad, things are breaking, you're having all these sort of issues. Well, you know that, okay, well, this stuff is broken, I just need to fix it, and then I can keep continuing on my way. You can also look back and you can say, oh, okay, well, I did all this work to get the boat ready, and then I sailed for 6,000 miles already, and we went through, remember that 1, 2, 3 different bad squalls, and we went through that long calm, and then I got sunburnt that one time, and I used aloe, and now that's all better. Well, that was a heck of a lot of work that I had to go through to get to this point, and I really only have this much more to go, so if I gave up right now and headed in, that would just be, why did I do all the rest of this work? Let's just keep going. We'll get to that destination and do whatever we have to do to get there, and then we're cracking beers and having fun. That sort of thing. That's stuff that I keep in my mind. The other thing is if you're doing a really long passage, I always sort of shrink down my scope. So when I did the first trip around the world, one of the things that was tricky was that I was in the North Atlantic headed south, and I'm thinking to myself, man, how am I going to handle Cape Horn? And Cape Horn was like 7 months away, and it was causing me worry. And so instead of thinking about Cape Horn, I started saying, okay, well, I've crossed the Atlantic 2 times already, so this is sort of home waters. I know what to expect. How about we just think about the trip from here down to the equator, and then we'll move on to the South Atlantic, and then we'll move on to the Southern Ocean from there. But I'm gonna keep the goal and the really scary stuff in the back of my mind, because I don't want to totally forget about it. But at the same time, I don't want to sit there and dwell on it if it's months and months and months away. And that can even be, for a trip from the Caribbean to, say, Cape Cod, you don't want to be spending the first 5 days of your trip worried about what it's going to be like in the Gulf Stream. And then you're missing out on the first beautiful 5 days of trade wind sailing. It's warm, it's lovely. And then you get up to the Gulf Stream and there's no wind and you have to motor across it anyway. And then 2 days later, you're in at Cape Cod, and yeah, it was a great trip, but all you did was worry. It's one of those things you have to sort of stay in that moment and try your best to not let all these things that don't really have any grip on you right then and there. You just got to blow those out, but it's not easy. It's something that takes practice. Every time those thoughts come into your brain, you mentally have to say, all right, time to switch to something else, grab a book, or just bring up an old memory or something like that. Anything to sort of block that stuff that's giving you stress. You block that out, and then boom, you move on. And like I said, it takes practice, but practice makes perfect. And the more you do it, I mean, it's almost a meditation thing. I hate to say it, but you really have to focus. And I think it's almost, well, nah, I guess it's not like that, but it's it's just you have to sit there mentally. You have to work out your brain just like you work out anything. And the more you try it, the better you're going to get at it. And then, like I said, I've always felt that more and more of my mental capacity as somebody who can control their own thoughts and brain and stuff. It's all come from being out there on the ocean by myself, because I have enough time to practice and enough time to just sit and think and do all that. But and then fear, just fear. I don't know. The fear, I think, is a healthy thing. I think if you head out to sea and you're not afraid of what possibly could happen, then yeah, I don't want to say you shouldn't go out there, because I think everybody should spend a little time out on the old ocean. But I don't know. I sort of use that fear as a motivator for real. I use it to motivate me to check over the equipment every single day, to stay on top of things, to keep in reserve more water than I normally would. Even though I'd love to drink 1.5 gallons a day, I cut back a little just because of the fear of running out again, that sort of stuff. I don't know. I think fear can be good. And it's one of those things too, when you actually experience some of the ugly situations out at sea, a lot of times you're sort of pretty busy trying to either prepare for them or deal with them, like sail changes, things like that. Like take a typical squall. You're out there, and I can remember one night, middle of the night, doing some repairs. It's beautiful. I was in the doldrums, and absolutely stunning. There's these big cumulonimbus clouds around, but nothing was like moving all that fast. And I was trying to fix the gooseneck, the part that attaches the boom to the mast. It had a little gap, so it was every once in a while it was like thumping, dunk, dunk, and you hear that on the boat, and you got to find the source. And this is when we're headed south, so it's still early on in the trip, but big, bright, almost full moon up there. So it's just this beautiful, placid night, and I'm just working away. I think it was like 3 a.m, and off to the east, I sort of see this cloud bank and take a little note of it, but not too much. And then 10 minutes later, I look again, and it's pretty big, pretty fierce looking. And instantly I go into, okay, we got a big squall coming mode. And so all the tools, everything I was working on, put it all back together, put the tools away. All of a sudden, I'm busy as a bee, running around the deck, getting everything sorted, put up the triple reef main, tried to put Mongo together, just to get ready for a little bit of a blow. It ended up being a pretty ferocious squall, and I learned a lot from it because I screwed up a lot. One, the hydro blade for Mongo, I put it into the water, but I didn't lock it down tight enough. And so as we started galloping over these waves, it popped up. So I lost my steering, or my self-steering, and had to hand steer. But that also snowballed, and led to me having to be on deck on the helm, out of the protection of the Dodger, in the driving rain, for about 2 hours, and I had not gotten any of the wet weather gear on. So I was just in a pair of boxers, because it was, 20 minutes before it was 78 degrees and it was beautiful and I was dry and all that sort of stuff. And then found myself in that situation. By the end of that thing, I was just sitting there just shivering. And I remember when I finally got into a position where I could, where we weren't riding it, because it was actually one of the things is it gave us a good bit of wind to make a few miles. And so I had to sort of use it. Normally I might have gone like hove to, but I also didn't know what the strength of this thing was going to be and all that sort of stuff. Most of those squalls in the doldrums are short-lived. 2-hour one is a pretty substantial one. Normally it's 30 minutes tops, but it was pretty fierce. And it was one of those where I almost deserved what I got because of how quickly, I should have double checked. And I remember writing in my logbook that night, lesson learned, double check all this sort of stuff, because if you don't, then you get to sit out in the driving rain for 2 hours. I'll never forget that. Now I can look back and laugh, but yeah, I remember when I finally got to the point where I hove to and then was able to fix Mongo and get that started, man, I went down below and I definitely had a stiff drink that night. And I was shivering, I think, throughout the whole night. Even though after the squall passed, everything comes back up, and then we were becalmed again. And I believe it was the next morning where there was an owl on the boat. So crazy. Yeah, a lot of adventures out there. It's pretty fun. And then we're gonna get to the very last one, and this question is kind of interesting. So, seamanship, what does it mean to you? And I don't know. Well, I do know. I know exactly what it is. And I do want to make sure I'm framing this correctly because it's not. Seamanship is. It's just a word. It's a word that's trying to describe what it means to do things. I think. I think of it as seamanship is the same as making the right choice when at sea. And the right choice, that's pretty vague, I suppose. For a racing boat, the right choice may be, because the goal is to get to the finish line first, maybe to risk it all to get a little extra boat speed and get in there and win. But I because I'm not really a racer, I don't even want to wiggle my big toe into that world of what seamanship is for a race boat. But I think for a general sailor who likes to go out and sail, and whether it's blue water, coastal, whatever, they're just out for the actual pleasure of sailing. I think seamanship is about making the right choices and making the smart choice to inevitably keep the boat and the crew and yourself all in good health, safe, sound, and able to return to land untraumatized. So for instance, if you're setting out to go on a long passage and you've got an area like the Gulf Stream that you need to cross, and you get up there and there is a nasty little low pressure system that's forecast to come up, but you're still a couple days away. I think good seamanship would be to hove to and hang loose for 24 hours to let that system pass. And then you come in afterwards and ride across that Gulf Stream, that known dangerous area, and without having to go through that weather. Because if you can avoid it, then great, because it's less stress on the boat, less stress on the crew, less stress on you, unless that's what you're out there for. And if that's the case, and you're out there to go and really, experience heavy weather and all that sort of stuff, then I think good seamanship is making the right choice of having the right boat, making sure you have plenty of spares. I think you could really say that seamanship is choices. It's making the right choice to protect that boat and those that are trying to survive on it, because at its absolute basic core, a boat is the only thing preventing a human from dying at sea. And what I mean by that is you can't go and swim across an ocean without a boat right next to you. The ocean is not a place for people to be. It's weird. That's not our environment. We can't survive there. So we've created these boats and these ships to be able to take us out there. But that is our 100% lifeline. And when somebody says, "Oh man, that's some good seamanship right there," somebody's made it through a storm, I often think like, yeah, okay, so the person had to go through all that. There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong, but I always sort of tend to ask the question, is there any way they could have avoided that? Or did they just blatantly sort of run through it to get to the end? And I think there's something to be said for when you are in those conditions, being able to handle them, making the right choices, and knowing your equipment can handle it. But I don't know. I think I always err on that side of caution, saying, was there a way to be able to avoid it that wasn't taken? But I guess I'm playing devil's advocate with myself. I would think that you could say that about anywhere. You're like, ooh, you just didn't even have to go out there. So there's I can poke holes in my own little theory there. But seamanship is going to be different for every person. But I think for me, in without just trying to ramble on here and come up with some prophetic or crazy answer, it really is, for me, it's making the right choices, the safe choices to keep your boat and your crew and everybody in nice, safe, sound, and get them back to land after experiencing the wonder of sea. So that also, I think that also comes into play with knowing sort of, and this one's kind of hard too, you want to say, well, you don't want to take risks by, going way outside of your comfort zone. If you're only sailing on lakes, but you want to cross an ocean, you got to get your experience. Well, that's what I did. And then ended up going around the world. So you have to always kind of step things up a little bit, but I did it in a pretty, I would say, a pretty responsible way. I was on a lot of boats that we cruised. I was with really good captains that I got to watch. I was also with a lot of really crummy captains that were not very good. I think also there is a little bit, and this is my own personal take on this, but I think seamanship also is, I think an aspect of it would be handing down the information that you've gained. So if you're a really good captain, you've got a bunch of crew on board, it's not just being like, oh, look at what I can do. It's, this is how I do this, and this is why I made that decision. So you're sort of handing it off. And that's sort of a side route for sure. But I think if someone were to say, that's a great captain, that's what you see for, or that's what you call seamanship right there, I think that would be a little aspect, a little something you could add to it. So I don't know. That's a tricky one, but it's all going to be down to the purpose of your sailing, why you're out there sailing, and you're going to have to tailor make it to what you want, essentially. Like I said, I don't want to get into the racing thing because I think that's a whole different ball game when it comes to seamanship. But yeah, so those were great questions, and I went way. I thought I was going to be able to answer those in about 30 minutes. So now we're at 50. So I think what I'm probably going to do, I still want to do the Stephen Callahan story, but I think I'm going to have to go to work here in a little bit, and then, it's starting to rain. So maybe I will have time. I don't know. It's 5:30 in the morning now, or no, 5:15. Let me take a break, and we will see. And thank you, Tim. I really do appreciate the feedback and the questions, and gave me fodder for a whole nother podcast as we creep up to episode 100. But we'll see. Maybe this will be a long one where I get into Stephen Callahan, but I got to set some stuff up, and we'll see if we go from there. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.